17,000 meals every single day. That's not a fleet. That's not a base. That's one ship, a single Nimitz-class aircraft carrier somewhere in the Pacific or the Mediterranean, feeding its crew 4 times in 24 hours. The food bill runs about $60,000 a day, $22 million a year, roughly the price of a small fighter jet, burned through in groceries every 12 months on one warship. In our last video, we looked at the hull technicians who keep these ships alive for $24,000 a year. Today, we go one layer deeper into the same system. Because before any of those sailors can fix anything, they have to eat. And how the U.S. Navy moves food across an ocean to feed 5,000 mouths at sea is one of the most underrated logistical operations on the planet. Start with the basic math. A Nimitz-class carrier carries roughly 5,000 people on a full deployment. That includes the ship's crew, the air wing, and the staff of the carrier strike group commander. 5,000 humans sealed inside a 1,000-foot steel hull, sometimes for weeks without seeing land. A typical American town of 5,000 people has dozens of restaurants, a dozen grocery stores, gas stations, delivery trucks rolling in every morning. The carrier has none of that. It has galleys, 5 of them. And whatever was loaded on board the last time the ship saw port, or the last time another ship pulled alongside. A standard deployment lasts 6 to 9 months. The ship's frozen and dry storage holds roughly 60 to 90 days of food, which means at least once a month, sometimes more, the carrier has to be resupplied while moving through open water at 15 knots. Every meal that crew eats was planned years before they walked up the gangway. Here's the part most people don't know. The carrier doesn't have one cafeteria. It has 4 separate dining facilities, and which one you eat in depends entirely on your rank. The general mess feeds the enlisted crew, the sailors below the rank of E7. That's most of the ship. About 4,000 people, cycling through long stainless steel serving lines, plastic trays, 20 minutes to eat before getting back to work. The food is good. It is not fancy. The chief petty officer's mess is different. Chiefs run the Navy at the deck plate level, and their mess reflects it. Tablecloths, better cuts of meat, a separate galley with its own cooks. It's a privilege earned over 15, 20 years of service. The wardroom is where the officers eat. Stewards in white jackets, real plates, real silverware, a menu instead of a serving line. By tradition, the executive officer presides at lunch. By tradition, you stand when a senior officer enters. And then there is the captain's mess. The captain of an aircraft carrier has a personal cook, a private dining room, and the standing authority to invite anyone, from a brand new airman to a foreign admiral, to eat with him. What gets discussed at that table sometimes shapes the deployment. 4 dining rooms, same ship, same ocean, 4 different worlds, separated by rank and tradition. That's not corruption. That's the Royal Navy heritage that the U.S. Navy inherited 250 years ago, encoded into how the modern fleet still operates. Whether it should still operate that way is a different conversation. It's 4 in the morning. Most of the ship is asleep. Below the flight deck, in a windowless steel compartment, 2 sailors are already pulling sheet pans out of industrial ovens. A Nimitz-class carrier bakes its own bread. Every day, roughly 800 loaves, plus rolls, pastries, and whatever the menu calls for that morning. The bakery runs overnight so that breakfast is fresh at 5:30. By 6, the lines start. Eggs cooked by the hundred, bacon by the case, coffee in volumes that would supply a small chain of cafes. Lunch hits at 11, dinner at 5, and then, around 11 at night, comes the meal civilians never hear about: midrats, midnight rations. The fourth meal, served for the night shift sailors who keep the reactors, the watch stations, and the flight deck running while the rest of the ship sleeps. The galley on a U.S. carrier never closes. Not on Sunday, not on Christmas, not in a typhoon. The day the food stops, the ship stops. $60,000 a day in food, spread across a typical 250-day deployment cycle. That's roughly $15 million per ship, per year, just to feed the crew. Across the Navy's 11-carrier fleet, the food line item alone runs into the hundreds of millions. Put that next to the cost of the ship itself, and it disappears. A Ford-class carrier costs over $13 billion to build. A year of carrier-grade groceries is rounding error. But the bill isn't really the point. The point is what it represents. That $60,000 a day buys roughly 20,000 pounds of food consumed daily. It buys 800 gallons of milk. It buys somewhere around 30,000 sandwiches a day when you count the sandwich bar that runs around the clock. It buys enough calories to keep 5,000 humans operating in an environment that punishes the body. Sleep deprivation, 12-hour shifts, constant noise, no daylight for weeks at a time. A sailor on a carrier burns through roughly 4,000 calories a day. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's the job. And if those calories don't show up on schedule, the ship's combat readiness drops within 72 hours. This is what the taxpayer is actually buying with that food line. Not meals, endurance. Now here's where it gets impressive. The carrier carries about 60 days of food. The deployment is 270. The math doesn't work unless you can refill the warehouse without going home. The Navy has a name for that operation: Underway Replenishment, UNREP in the shorthand. And it's one of the most technically demanding evolutions in naval operations. The picture: a combat logistics ship, usually a Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo vessel, pulls alongside the carrier. Two warships, each over 1,000 feet long, each weighing tens of thousands of tons, traveling in parallel about 180 feet apart at 13 knots for 4 to 6 hours straight. Cables stretch between them. Pallets fly across on high lines. Helicopters lift heavier loads from deck to deck in continuous rotation. In a single replenishment, a carrier can take on 200 tons of food, plus fuel for the air wing, plus ammunition, plus mail, plus spare parts. All of it transferred while both ships are moving, with maybe 40 meters of ocean between two steel walls that absolutely cannot touch. If they touch, both ships are damaged. If they touch in heavy seas, sailors die. The U.S. Navy does this kind of operation thousands of times a year. The Chinese Navy is still learning how. The gap in this single capability, sustained logistics at sea, anywhere on Earth, is one of the largest and least discussed advantages the United States has at sea. That's the official version. Here's what the data actually shows. Sustainment is also the carrier's quietest weakness, and foreign planners know it. A Ford-class carrier can technically operate for 25 years without refueling its reactors. It cannot operate for 25 days without food. The nuclear core is the engine. The galley is the time limit. Every UNREP requires a logistics ship within a few hundred miles. That logistics ship is unarmored, slow, and predictable. It has to come from somewhere: a forward base, a friendly port, a supply chain that begins on a farm in Iowa and ends on a flight deck in the South China Sea. A serious adversary doesn't need to sink the carrier. They need to break the supply chain that feeds it, pressure the forward bases, hold the logistics ships at risk, force the carrier to operate on a shorter leash. This isn't theory. The People's Liberation Army Navy has spent the last 15 years studying exactly this. Not how to fight a U.S. carrier directly, but how to make it run out of things. Food, fuel, munitions. The kind of war where the missile doesn't need to hit the ship, it just needs to hit the ship that feeds the ship. The question that follows is uncomfortable. The United States built a fleet designed to operate anywhere on Earth, indefinitely, with a logistics tail that stretches across oceans. That was a brilliant strategy in 1995. The world it was designed for had no peer competitor. The world it operates in today does. So back to the original number. 17,000 meals a day, $60,000, 22 million a year. What does it actually buy? It buys the ability to keep 5,000 Americans operating at full capability anywhere in the world for 9 months at a time without coming home. It buys the bakery that runs at 4 in the morning so the night shift gets fresh bread. It buys the 4 dining rooms that preserve a chain of command 2.5 centuries old. It buys the underway replenishments that no other navy on Earth can run at this scale. And it buys a vulnerability, because every system this elaborate has a single point of failure, and the food chain is one of them. Napoleon supposedly said that an army marches on its stomach. He was talking about boots on a road in 1805. The principle hasn't changed. The scale has. The strategic question for the next 20 years isn't whether the U.S. can build more carriers. It's whether the country can still defend the supply lines that feed the ones it already has. That's a question we'll come back to in detail. The next video moves to the other end of the same problem, where 5,000 sailors actually sleep on a warship designed first and foremost to fight. The bunk system on a carrier tells you almost as much about American naval strategy as the flight deck does. If this kind of breakdown is what you're here for, the subscribe button is where you tell the algorithm to send you the next one. $22 million a year on groceries for one ship. 11 ships in the fleet. Do that math out loud, and the size of what the United States is actually doing every day at sea starts to become visible.